Hey, Dr. Borse. Welcome on,
Hi,
sir. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you doing? Thanks for having me, man.
I'm doing well. And just for the audience, my name is Mac. You can see there, Porn Free Millennial. I have a podcast and a Substack called Porn Free Millennial. My ex account is Mac Nomadic because I am traveling remotely, working out of my RV. I'm in the beautiful state of Wyoming right now. It's a little bit windy. And we have on today, I think, Dr. Borse. Let's see, this is, I think, the fourth time you've been on the podcast.
Yeah.
And this podcast has been going for a little over a year. This is going to be the 31st episode. So I just happy to have you on. You want to tell the audience a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Well, thanks for having me on again. I told you once that my goal was to become the Alec Baldwin of your podcast, so you know, I'm working on that. For the audience members who haven't gotten to know me, you can find me on X. You can't find me on Facebook because I got kicked off a while ago. Um, I have a PhD from LSU in literary theory. I'm basically a generalist. I've done comprehensive exams at the undergraduate, master's, and PhD level in everything from Greek tragedy to 20th century literature. I teach philosophy, film, and literature courses, including Chaucer and Middle English, Shakespeare, everything. Um, I am intensely interested in the topics that Macnomatic has championed, especially in the ways that technology impacts human consciousness and culture and our development over time, not to say progress necessarily.
Sure.
Um, and I'm very happy to share what I think are insights, but may not be, with the audience on this extraordinarily important topic. So thank you for having me.
Excellent. Yeah, this is gonna be. I think this is gonna be a pretty good conversation. I think both of us like to go deep into psychology. I like to reflect a lot about personal experience and really like today's episode, today's live stream today. I'm saying today a lot. This is live. Today's the day. We're gonna be talking about the Lily Phillips story. So, uh, if you're living under a rock, you might not have heard about this, but there was a OnlyFans model that made the decision to sleep with 100 men in it was less than 24 hours. And I was listening to this today in an interview. I think she's actually doing that to prepare herself to set the world record. What a prestigious world record to set for sleeping with 1,000 men in one day. I think the world record right now I think is like 919, which is just unfathomable to think about. But what Dr. Boris and I are going to talk about today is the Lily Phillips story. I called this episode "Lonely Fans" because I think there's a big problem with loneliness in our culture today, and I think that's exacerbated by many different things. I talk a lot about pornography in my podcast, its effects on my life. We'll dive into that. Uh, and it looks like we have someone on right now that's a mutual friend of ours in the live stream chat. Doc, thanks for hopping on
Hey,
and
Doc.
supporting us. But we're going to be talking today about this story. Obviously, it's pretty visceral, right? I think there's a video of her that went pretty viral, like being interviewed after they did a documentary of it, of her just her reaction to the whole thing, and it looked like she was just pretty blank inside. I think at one point she got a little bit emotional, as she should. But all in all, I think it's a pretty tragic story. Just seeing this happen online. I think for me, I first read about it on X, on the platform X, and uh, just a lot of I would say anger, a lot of feelings being risen up from this. I think feelings coming from like good intentions, bad intentions all around. And overall, this just seems like a cultural moment where we should definitely examine this and talk about it. Uh, but just to add a little bit more context here, in her own words, Lily compared this experience to prostitution. She said, "This is just a different feeling." I think that raised a lot of questions about the exploitative nature of OnlyFans. I think it's being framed, at least from her side, and probably OnlyFans and people that support it as, some kind of personal choice or empowerment. But really, I think she said it herself. I think this is just an act of prostitution itself. And just one more thing to add before we talk about this, Dr. Borse, to start. One thing I believe your friend Kale, and he's been on the podcast, Kale Zeldin said, and it went pretty viral, is that Lily's mother serves as her financial manager. Just let that sink in for a second as you're listening to this, that her family's involved. I think her father's supportive of this as well. And she's 23, which is crazy. But I know I was kind of talking a lot. I wanted to build the scene a little bit. Slept with 100 guys in under 24 hours. Recorded a documentary about it. Everything's going viral right now. I mean, just for you, Dr. Borse, like, what were your just initial reactions to this? Just hearing this story and seeing it.
Well, I think I honestly, when you forwarded me that specific portion of the topic that we were going to be talking about, I was not aware of it because I know of OnlyFans, but I'm not really sure. And I'd like you to unpack this for our audience. I'm sure there are people, or just unpack it for me, how it works. My impression is it's a place where people do go and prostitute themselves by advertising that they will, for a fee, perform for you in a way that you want them to perform. Is that correct?
Yeah. And for the record, I've never not to put myself on a pedestal or anything, but that was never something that I really struggled with
Right.
on my end. But yeah, I think you basically summed up OnlyFans pretty well.
But when I read an article that was, I think, published by the Federalist, that was simply a reaction to the whole thing, and it just saddened me. It saddened me a great deal. One, because my thought was, oh, okay, so a 23-year-old woman, this is she's been convinced somehow by the culture that she has grown up in that this is the way to take ultimate control and command of her own self-determination. And how did we get here? And then my other thought was, wow, nothing's new under the sun.
Right.
In the sense that, this is not really different than the old by comparison to now, I guess, peep show booths that operated. It's just that it's just served up with technology, and it's made easier.
Right.
So it's more seductive. And when you overlay all of that with the idea of, that it's an expression of human agency and the transactional nature of all of it among consenting adults, you can see it. You can see why somebody might adopt this view. And then when you add to that mom is operating as her financial manager, I'm thinking, I wish Kale was here tonight, because we'd have a whole conversation, we still can, about like where feminism went off the rails. I mean, it's amazing, because it was mounted as a movement to say that everything that's wrong with culture in the world is the commodification of women in the marriage market, to the only way I can win is by commandeering that market and commodifying myself. So it's
for the pleasure and the desire of the man, still the patriarchy.
Right. I mean,
which is crazy.
Yeah. So it's like, wow, that was a neat trick you pulled off there, patriarchy. You finally convinced women to just go along with it. And
yeah.
I've always said this about slavery too. If I was a racist and I wanted to keep brown people where I wanted to keep brown people, I'd just give them money. And it seems to me that we're talking about the same thing here.
Yeah. And maybe let's expand upon that a bit, because, I oftentimes talk about this, and it's part of my logo, right? It's breaking free. It's breaking free of the bonds of pornography in our lives. I think you mentioned slavery. And, when I think about this, I do think of a certain slavery of the mind and of the soul, right? We're slaves to our own desire, to lust. Also slaves, I think, just to medicating or to avoiding unpleasant realities about ourselves,
Right.
unpleasant feelings. At least for me, and I talk about this on my podcast a lot. Like porn for me, when I look back at it through therapy and through recovery groups, all of that stuff, ultimately, I think it was something I was hooked on as a kid because, of course, it's alluring and, naked women, all that stuff is going to draw you in. But the real thing about it is it's a way to cope with pain. If I'm feeling pain, I'm going to be coping with it with porn, with going to these images, going to these sites. And I think what I'm seeing now, and sorry if you can hear my dog in the background, I apologize about that. But I think what we're seeing now, right, is uh, we're seeing this proliferation of media, right, of attention grabbing. Everything's trying to go after your attention, right, online. Any type of market that you look at, any type of, I would say, vector of life, someone's trying to get your attention. Someone's trying to hook you in through media, through apps, through technology. And I think what's happening is it's kind of like this nasty cycle of where I think men and women are both feeling that sense of isolation because they're growing up with this stuff. Like for me, like growing up with porn, you start to disassociate yourself in that sexual experience to where you almost have like two different boxes that you're compartmentalizing things. Like you have like your real life and then you have like your porn life on the other side. And as a kid, I feel like in growing up, and maybe somebody as an adult even that might not realize this, is you can't just separate these things. Like there's no separation. Like to live, I think, in fullness and to live truly, I think, without fooling yourself or tricking yourself, you can't have that separation. And I think where there is that separation, I think it's hard for the sexes to feel like they trust each other, to feel connected. I think men have a certain viewpoint of women, women have a certain viewpoint of men. And then I think this online market of sex and selling ourselves and buying that, right? Because it's not just like one person, right? It's not just the women putting their bodies, for sale. It's also the men, of course, which no one wants to talk about. It's the men that are driving the demand for this, right? The men, by far are the ones that want to see this, that are paying for it. Maybe not with money, but with their attention, right? With eyes on it. So I think for me that like the isolation is just being driven, the voids is being driven larger and larger. And I think something like this situation here, I think, uh, I think perfectly just encapsulated just how uh, messed up this is all getting. And like you said, it's not like this is new. Like this has happened before. Like I heard about the statistic of the world record because there's like a gangbang conference every year in like Poland, and it's just like what is going on? But it's
Yeah.
not like that just started, since the iPhone
Yesterday.
was created. Like that's been around
Yeah.
for millennia, right? But now you have access to it at the click of a button. If you're curious or if a friend comes over and shows you something, like I was exposed to that kind of stuff like when I was a kid. And like what does that do to your brain? What does that do to how you develop? And I think that as we get older, and if we're not uh, focused on our development and treating this and treating whatever that what's isolating us with healthy measures, right? I think it's just going to drive that isolation further, which then drives that demand. So I
I
know I threw a lot at you there. What are your
Yeah,
thoughts
no,
on
no,
that?
no. My thoughts are spinning. One, I think it's weirdly all of it comes back to a certain kind of war against women that's been going on forever.
Mm,
As Faulkner would say, I don't know if you can see my books back here, but Faulkner's Sound of the Fury just went into the public domain, and I was very happy about that.
mm,
Um, in another novel by Faulkner called Light in August, there's a moment when a man uh, listens to the birth of a baby by a woman that he has fallen in love with, but he did not impregnate, who was impregnated by somebody else. She's a single young woman. She's one of two of the main characters of Light in August. Her name is Lena Grove. And at the moment that he overhears the birth, he realizes that he is experiencing something mysterious about women and their bodies specifically, and the relationship that women have with their bodies that men do not have. That signals that something in women that is dark and threatful to men. And in another context, I have done interpretations of Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho and tried to point out to people that they've got the movie completely wrong. But the point that I've tried to make is that, you know, in the West, a typical sort of literary, symbolic, metaphoric expression of male power is money, but money is a stand-in for man's seed. And so if you can waste it without putting it at risk, then that's proof in our society that you are potent. So that's why we make it, you know, in the rap videos and in other videos, we make the money rain. We could just waste it. We can just throw it in the air for anybody to get. Okay. To me, that's a stand. That's interesting. That's a stand-in, and this is to you, just a bookmark, but it's a stand-in for the wasting of seed. Not only in the onistic act, but in the whole participation of the wasting of seed in porn, which is not in an effort to procreate. It's not in an effort to be creative. It is an effort to simply dump in the dirt. In Faulkner's novel and in Psycho, what you see is that what the patriarchy is really, really afraid of is that women have this mysterious power to take that seed and do something with it that men can't control, which is make a new life.
Right.
She can secret it. She can secret it in this mysterious place called the womb. And then what she produces from that is not a mere replication of the man. It is something new.
Right.
And something free and something independent. And this is a threat. This is a threat to the old god, Zeus's father, who eats his children as they come out of the womb because he's afraid that they will overthrow him. I know this is all very mythic, but do you see how deep this is?
Incredibly deep.
It's incredibly deep, and I think it's knit into us at the level of our DNA. So when you look at the war that porn is launching against everything, it's really it's a symptom of a war against human dignity, against human agency, against human independence. It masquerades as independence,
right?
But it's really an expression of a kind of nihilistic embrace of the only way that I can commandeer the seat of God of the universe is to commit suicide. I literally, in the Lily Parker story, my immediate thought when I read that her next stunt will be to try to have sex with 1,000 men, and Doc knows this because he's old enough, my immediate thought went to the movie Last Exit to Brooklyn, in which a woman almost dies. Just making her body completely available to any man that wants to show up in an abandoned car.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? It was stunningly graphic and harrowing for me spiritually. Really? And this is what was that? The late 1980s? Or mid 1980s? I mean, it's a movie that is predictive of what we're looking at now.
Sure.
But the whole thing to me is so saddening but it's also so obvious. What do you do? There's a process by which you attack the most basic fundamental foundation for human society and culture, which is marriage.
Yeah.
And then you denigrate the most fundamental unit of social order, which is the family.
Mm-hmm.
You replace it with individualism,
mm-hmm.
and say the only way that you can express your individualism, and here's a little bit of Foucault for you, is to recognize that all dynamics between individuals are power dynamics and they're unbalanced.
Right.
Which means the only way that you can express your human agency is to pervert those power dynamics, which are transactional and economic, by seizing control. The feminists lead in by saying that the patriarchy commodifies and objectifies women on the marriage market. And then they say, well, the only antidote to that is for us to seize it, ruin the marriage market, and then say, we'll commodify ourselves. And then you replace the fact that we are supernatural animals with the idea of the fact that we are natural animals, and then say the only way to express your agency is to abandon yourself to forces in your body that you have no control over, which is the sex drive. Oh, I guess I just ended the podcast, didn't I?
I'm just sorry. Like, check. No, that's fantastic. That's why I love talking to you. You have a brilliant mind.
Like,
but
I've been thinking about this since you contacted me.
Yeah.
And this is kind of the way my brain works. It's like, oh, it's all, to me, it's all so obvious.
Yeah, but and sorry to interrupt you, but man, it took me 20 years to figure that one out, right? And a divorce.
Well, me too.
You know,
I mean, I've been thinking about this the whole time. I'm 60. I'm an old man.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking about it because I think it's kind of the most important thing.
It is.
And really what we want to spend our time doing is talking about, well, what do we do? What can we do? What is the force against which the Lily, because so far, I'll tell you, in my perception, what faithful people have done in the spiritual war is they have decided that it's not going to work to have the bright city built on the hill as an alternative. The only thing we can do is refuse to participate and go underground. And I think that's a mistake. I think that we need to offer men attractive models of what it means to be men.
Ooh, I was getting a little bit worried when you were saying attractive models, but then you ended it quite well.
Yeah, and
that's a great point.
And so if you guys follow me on X, and I'm not asking anybody to do that, you'll notice that my persona on X is kind of as a hyper alpha male. And I don't apologize. I have the receipts. I do joke. I am a serious person. Matt can he can vouch for me.
Right.
But I think it's extremely important for men to show other men that it is good to keep your promises, to be dignified.
Yes.
To treat other individuals with respect.
Yes.
And to defend yourself.
Yes.
Openly and with full masculinity. Because it's not just the war on women is a war against the very foundation of human society. The war on men is to go along with it.
Yeah. Okay. Can I interrupt? This is great.
Yes.
All right. So this is fantastic. So yeah, I think like growing up Catholic, I'm Christian. I kind of felt like this is something that I feel like, and I know you're Catholic, but I know this is something I witnessed kind of in the church to where people just like wouldn't talk about it. Right. It's kind of like almost as like everybody's doing great. Nobody's looking at porn. Everyone's fantastic. Meanwhile, everybody's looking at porn. No one's marriage is quite doing well, but no one's willing to talk about it. And I feel like kind of just growing up with that. And I think with porn in general in our society, that's always just been something that like no one ever wants to talk about it. Everyone kind of has this back of their head kind of like, okay, like, yeah, I'm sure like that guy's or that like maybe some wife is saying, well, my husband doesn't look at porn, but that guy, her husband looks at porn. Like, what a weirdo. Meanwhile, it's like every man pretty much is looking at porn, like over 70% at least. I'm very confident to say at least maybe once a month. Like the statistics with Pornhub are crazy. it's like millions of users like a month
Yeah.
watching this stuff. And you could like stack up like per month, like the videos, or like in a year, the videos, like the amount of minutes watched, it goes back like centuries. It's like thousands of thousands and thousands of hours, right? So
Yeah.
like BS to the fact of like, oh well, at least I don't do that. BS. And we need to talk about it. And that's why I'm talking about it. I'm glad you're talking about it too, is I think real masculinity is living in integrity. It's being honest. And if you're with somebody, right? Like I'm dating this amazing woman right now. I, as a man, it's my duty to take care of myself and to take care of her. How am I taking care of myself or taking care of her if I'm masturbating to strangers online and lusting over them? That's one of the biggest, I think, breaches in trust in a relationship. And I talk about that with confidence because I lived through it in a 5-year marriage with someone that I loved very much, to where I had this relationship with porn that I just did not have a mature understanding of. And I just didn't really think about it in the way I think about it now, as a complete destructive habit. And it ruined our intimacy. It ruined our trust. It caused deep devastation, uh, not just in her, but in me, right? Like
Right.
my self-confidence, my relationship with God, like my ability to have faith in myself that I'm the man who I say I am. And I don't think I'm the only one, right? So I hope as we talk today and as this message is shared, that I think men can, something can light up it within them to not just be quiet about it and to go underground. And that's kind of to the point you're making. Men need to stop. I think this whole culture that we're in right now, men are just putting their heads up their asses and just being rolled right now, just being rolled by everything. And I think with porn for specifically, there's a great quote in Proverbs that I think I've quoted a few times about the man being seduced by this I think prostitute, and that he's being led to slaughter like an ox, and he doesn't realize he's dead until he sees the arrow in his liver, and that her words and her seduction is going to lead him right to hell. And I just say that as living through it and almost coming to the fact where I didn't want to live my life anymore. It will lead you straight to hell. It will lead you to the deepest, darkest places if you let it. It might come to you as something that just doesn't really seem like that big of a deal. But like we're talking about right now, and what we're saying so eloquently, it really is an attack on creation. Like
Yeah.
we're literally like wasting our seed.
Yeah.
We're wasting our seed. Like I don't know how else to say it. Like you're wasting your seed to a digital stranger and to somebody that you are turning into an object that's being objectified for you, for your desire, right? But the hardest thing about it is it gets programmed into us so early, and that's what makes me so freaking angry. Is I did this poll on X a few days ago where I just said, "Hey, like, what was the age where you first introduced to porn?" I did this on my Substack too. Crazy answers all around, but the average age was around 10 years old, which is when I was first introduced to porn. And just think about that. And I think there's some studies that we can probably talk about at a later date that basically say it's around 10 to 11 years is the average age that young boys are exposed to porn. And just think about that what that does on a societal level. Like, because I think about it, I'm like, no, like 10-year-old should witness a gangbang, but also like no 60-year-old, no 80-year-old,
Yeah.
nobody should experience this stuff. Like, no one should experience this stuff. Like, it has no purpose, it has no place, it has no place in our existence. Like, screw this stuff. I don't want to see it. I don't want my future kids to see this stuff, but it's out there and we have to talk about it. We have to fight against it. And that's how I feel about it.
Well, and from a philosophical point of view, you have to ask yourself, what is it an attack? First of all of this is, when I was a kid, I was puzzled by the Catholic language about powers and principalities.
Mm.
about a grand spiritual war that's going on all around me that
Right.
I can kind of intuit, but I can't know directly.
Right.
And for a long time, I kind of didn't believe in it. And then now that I've gotten older, I realized, oh, I see how it's being expressed now. What is this a war against? Okay, so when I do the great chain of being in my philosophy class, and I talk about, we start at the bottom where things have existence, they have being, but they don't have life. That's mineral. And then we move up the chain and we go to those things that have existence and life, and that's vegetable. And then we move up one rung on the ladder, and we're talking about things that have existence, life, and the ability to move independently. That's animal. And then we go to the next rung, which is human.
Okay.
Right. And now you notice as you go up the ladder of existence, everything above another thing has all of the existence of the lower rung plus something. Right.
Right.
Plus something. And then above the human is the angelic order. I'm Catholic. I believe in it. Okay. And the difference between angels and human beings is that human beings have bodies and angels don't. They're pure intelligences. They're pure spirits. Okay. Each angel is its own species, which is an amazing thing to contemplate. Okay. But there's something special about the human order that not even angels possess. Okay. And this is straight up biblical. And if you're Christian or Catholic, you believe it. The only rung on the ladder that was made in the image and in the likeness of God are humans. Minerals are made in the image. Vegetables are made in the image. Animals are made in the image. Humans are made in the image and likeness. Angels are made in the likeness, but not the image. The attack is against the image and likeness of God himself as incarnated in the human body. And so, of course, the attack is against the human body. Of course, that's the scandal, is that the human body possesses a miracle and a mystery about existence in the universe that nothing else possesses. And so what are the dark forces in the universe going to attack? They have to attack that. And everything is arrayed to attack that and the things that so what do? We get rid of the idea that anything is taboo. We get rid of the idea that anything is sacred. I'm going to remind you, in an earlier podcast, I think I mentioned the word obscene is theatrical. It means we do not put on stage anything that is sacred. So you don't see, in Shakespeare, you'll never see a marriage and you'll never see the conjugal act. You'll hear it, you'll hear a reference to it, but it will not be on stage because that is taboo. And taboo by the way, means sacred, and it means that which cannot be touched. It is off limits. And so what has modern society done but denigrated every single human relationship that revolves around the sacred?
And I love how you said on set, on screen.
Yeah. Obscene.
Like,
yeah.
But when you think about it, right, all this stuff's on our screens.
Oh, yeah.
The desecration of sex.
Is now the norm.
Right.
Feminism has tried to convince women that the only way to command their own bodies is to treat their bodies the way men treat their bodies.
Yeah.
And I would like to point out to everybody that there's a fundamental difference between men's bodies and women's bodies. Everything that is essential to being female is hidden from the human eye. The gods formed it that way for a purpose. Everything about a man is on the outside.
Right.
I joke about this.
Right.
I can bump my testicles into a bookcase.
Sure. Ouch.
Yeah. But a man's body, that's why we have always been comfortable with depicting the male nude as if it's no big deal. Because it's not mysterious, it's not beautiful, it's not sacred the way a woman's body is. And I know that sounds old-fashioned, but I absolutely believe it.
Yeah, and I mean, just think about it too. Like anywhere we go, like you go to the gym, and it's just like you're literally. It's almost like you're going to. It's like softcore porn, just going to
Yeah.
the gym, just with what women are wearing.
Yeah.
It's like the tightest clothes. Shorts are now just basically thongs, and like the least covering you can, right? And that's what's being influenced with all the fitness influencers. And I think that's why we wanted to talk about this today, right? Because this OnlyFans models, I think, are trying to, or OnlyFans is trying to capture the influence of uh young, or is trying to influence, I think, young people. I think young men that, hey, this is cool. This is a way that you can. And sorry, I'm going to interrupt myself, but I have just some statistics. So the platform itself boasts over 220 million users, 2 million creators. And something that jumped out was OnlyFans saw a 75% increase in new users in just 1 month during the COVID pandemic.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like people were isolated, right? They couldn't go outside, they couldn't date physically because of these stupid lockdowns. So then they went to OnlyFans. And I think OnlyFans in a way has been marketed to treat treat loneliness, but that's why I call it lonely fans, is
Yeah.
because it's not treating loneliness. I think it's exacerbating, it's increasing loneliness, because at the end of the day, right, it's a transaction. You're transacting your time, your attention, your money to a woman or to a man if there's only fans
Yeah.
men,
Yeah.
right? But it's a transaction. It's not actual connection. There's the money there, there's the attention, the power,
Right.
uh, but it's not true connection. It's not truly going to solve any loneliness. It's just going to isolate you more, right? And I
Well,
talk
let me.
about this with. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I would just interrupt that by saying that it's puzzling to a lot of Christians that in the Catholic faith, the use of prophylactics is barred from the conjugal act,
What's
and
hard?
the use of prophylactics as a birth control device.
Oh, okay.
You would
Gotcha.
you would think that that would be the safest and the most sort of humane way to do it, because you're not changing the physiology of a woman's body with chemicals in order to prevent conception, right?
Gotcha.
You're just blocking issue.
Gotcha.
Issue gets to happen, but it's not going to go into the womb, and you're not going to have the completion of the procreative act. And I didn't understand it for a long time myself. And then I had it explained to me by a very good priest who said, you realize that when you use a prophylactic, you're not actually touching your partner.
Hmm.
And I was like, oh my gosh, you're
Hmm.
right. I'm
Right.
just, and so I've made a joke out of that with my younger students when I say, this is why I believe that hookup culture and OnlyFans and porn doesn't work. Is because at the end of the day, what you're actually tacitly saying to yourself is, hey, do you want to just go back to my place and rub stuff? Well, why do I need somebody else for that?
Right.
And so now you're pretending that two consenting adults can transact with each other to use each other. And
Yeah. Yeah.
and somehow you're going to be okay with that. And I'm going to remind everybody of what Saint Pope John Paul the Great said. The opposite of love is not hate, it is use.
Hmm.
So the whole porn culture is to convince us that the only way that we can, in the most intimate way in the world, interact with each other is to use each other. That's what we have to buy into. And at the end of the day, if men and women both think about this for 5 minutes,
Right. Right.
they have to reject it if they have any respect for themselves at all. But what we've also done in this culture is we've attacked the idea that there is any such thing as respect. And so conversations like this sometimes can veer off into language where, oh, those two guys are just a couple of Puritans who are just out of sync with culture,
I've got
I
another
wish.
word for you that I've been called, which is, I just laugh every time. Simp.
Yeah.
Simp.
Yeah.
Normie. Like, what? Okay, cool. Every time someone says that, I'm just like, you have no maturity whatsoever on this
Well,
subject.
the other
And
thing
you will
is,
find out at some point, and it's really going to suck.
yeah. Well, one of the reasons I wear these rings, all right, this ring specifically here, is that the tradition of the marriage band is to let everyone know publicly that I am not available.
Right.
That particular portion of my humanity is reserved for one person and one person only.
Right.
And I'm telling you, this gives me a kind of confidence that I don't think I would have if I didn't have it.
Yeah.
And it's a great reminder to me. And I feel it, and I play with it, and it's on my hand when I bartend. It's on my hand when I teach at the university. It's on my hand when I go to the grocery store. And it is my shield.
That's amazing.
It's my superpower.
Yeah, it makes me think about, and for the audience, people hopping on, thanks for hopping on. Really appreciate everybody's attention and engagement here. Yeah, like I was married for 5 years, went through divorce. I could share the same sentiments, man. I felt like I was an elevated human being wearing that ring. And not a day goes by where, I feel that deeply, that sense of loss. And I will tell the audience, a big part of that was my relationship with porn and not being honest about it. It really caused terrible, terrible destruction to my marriage and to what was a very promising, loving relationship. Irrevocable damage.
Which is not to say, I firmly believe that we live in a fallen world.
Right.
And I do not judge people for their failures, for their frailties, for their attempts to do the really great thing, and it's not working out. I don't like the language that people often use to describe. People need to own what they do.
Sure.
And they need to own their own parts in all this, because that's part of human agency too.
Exactly.
But I don't want the audience to misunderstand me. I am not some moralistic dude that is walking around judging other people because they didn't do this or didn't do that. I'm fully cognizant of my weaknesses and of my failures.
Right.
But at the same time, my greatest foundation is this. I say this about my marriage, in the toughest times in my marriage, and I don't remember when I first did it with myself, but in the toughest times that I ever had, at one point it occurred to me simply to say to myself, oh, so this is what I meant when I said I do.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. That's what I'm doing today, because you can't predict it, right?
Yeah.
You bring your weaknesses to your relationships for sure. But you have to be open to the way that God reveals to you how he's going to offer you these graces that are going to enter your life, that are going to counterbalance those weaknesses.
Yeah, well said.
And obviously my bride is the biggest one, but then my kids too. Like at the end of the day, when I am tempted, I also have to think about my kids and my obligation to them.
Yeah.
As a father and as a husband, and by the way, to me, this is the order of it: husband first, father second, friend third, professional fourth.
Right.
But I do try to remind myself. I don't do it perfectly, for sure. I'm a sinner, just like the rest of you guys. But I have seen these graces that have been offered into my life as aids and tools that are available to me. They're freely available to me at any moment of the day when I'm feeling my weakness.
Right.
To just remind myself, I say to people, don't forget that every person that you meet is a way for God to reveal how he loves you that you can't know unless you see them. But at the same time, so are you to other people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to me, that's a great inspiring humility.
Yeah, and I think that's what a lot of people need to hear, that struggle with this, with porn, or with this with temptation, with sin, to be honest, right? Is that, like you just said, when we do that, it's kind of a two-way thing, right? To where there's people in our lives that want to love us, that God's going to work through, that it's beautiful. But then in our own life as well, we're not showing up to the table fully if we're living in this separate shadow life, to where we're isolating ourselves. For me with porn, it just felt like it was so sad. I felt so depleted. I felt so numb.
Well,
Void is a really good. Yeah.
There's a reason. On the one hand, porn is so ubiquitous and so public, and on the other hand, everybody does it in secret.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, with a few exceptions. So why does it have to be secreted away?
Right.
And
yeah, like why? Like let's dig into that.
I can, as you so eloquently talked about it, like you, and then you find yourself in this weird sort of crux of balancing these two sides and trying to convince yourself that you can command both.
Yeah, I tell this story. It was like one of the last. It was a relapse I had after like 2 years of sobriety when I was married, and it was in 2021 was when I initially had the idea to podcast about being porn free and spread my experience, talk about it with other people, because I was seeing how much it was helping me in my life. And in that time, I think that was about 3 years into my 5-year marriage, where I hit a rock bottom moment, but then I went to therapy, to group, Bible study, was doing all the right things. And then we moved from Denver to Colorado Springs, which was like an hour and a half. So I moved myself away from all these positive things that were in my life. And we got a house and everything was busy for a bit. But then once it died down and I didn't have those resources or those things in my life, whatever the stresses were that were coming down upon me, I went to the old way to medicate it, which was going to porn. But this moment that happened was I was like, I think like almost 2 years sober, doing really well. I created my Substack, Porn Free Millennial, and my podcast, Porn Free Millennial. And then it was like a week later, I relapsed bad. And I remember telling I know, right? It always happens. It's like you get so overconfident. I say, you get cocky, no pun intended. But I relapsed, I failed, right? And I remember telling myself, I'm going to take this to the grave. I'm never going to talk about it with my wife. She doesn't know. No one needs to know. I know God knows and God's mad, but I'm never going to tell her about it. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remembered it was biblical. I'm telling you, Dr. Borse, it was biblical. A tree, there was a giant windstorm, like all the fences, it was a giant tree broke in half and it fell, it almost hit our house. So the next day after I relapsed, I woke up and I think I had COVID too. Like I've had COVID twice, and both were connected to really bad relapses and really bad depressive. It was the worst combination. But I had COVID. This giant oak tree, broke, or cottonwood, broke, almost hit our house. So I had to deal with that, but I used that as an excuse not to talk about my relapse, right? Because I'm like, I can't tell her right now. I mean, heck, like she's stressed with work. I'm busy. Yeah. I'm not going to talk about it. So then, days turn into weeks turns into months. And then by the time it comes out, it's incredibly devastating and hurtful. Right. Yeah. So I just bring that up just to kind of add to what you're talking about is, I think like with any kind of sin really, or things where we miss the mark. Right. We have like some choices that we have to make. And I think we should make the next right choice, the next best choice. But oftentimes, I think with me, at least with my development, I didn't make the right choice. I'd make like the next wrong choice, because it's like, well, I already relapsed, so I might as well go back to it again because it feels good and I need that right now. I just need things to be easy. I don't need things to be hard. I can't have this hard conversation with my wife right now. I just can't.
Yeah, but all I would add is
all the excuses.
Well, not just that. One, when you're busy, the monster doesn't rear his head until you've gotten things all settled out and you're now on a trajectory of success. That's when the monster comes back out.
Right.
Right. And secondly, it feels good until it absolutely doesn't feel good, which is immediately.
Yeah.
Every time.
Every time. It's like, it would be directly linked to the orgasm, would be at the plummeting of every positive emotion, or every emotion that was I felt would just be, it'd like go off a cliff, and you would just have this like hole in your chest.
Yeah, I suspect that John Keats suffered from something similar, because in Ode on a Grecian Urn, he complains that human breathing passion leaves a heart high, sorrowful, and cloyed, a parching, a burning forehead, and a parching tongue. So he prefers the beauty that is only in poetry, not physical beauty, because that's the great danger of physical love. And yet, this is what we were talking about. This is why that is reserved. That's the Catholic word for it. It's reserved. It is reserved for the married state. And it is not public. It is taboo. I mean, taboo in the sense of sacred. And it is reserved because it is, as the Italians would say, it is molto pericoloso. It is ground zero. It is ground zero in the foundation of all good order. And so, of course, that has to be the thing that is going to be attacked. And so males are going to be feminized and women are going to be erased, ultimately.
Yeah, okay. That was something I was talking to my girlfriend about. It just seems like culture is trying to erase femininity and women. Like,
I don't mean femininity. We've gone to the next step. I mean females.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is, I don't know if you've kind of picked up on this, but it just seems like the NFL sports are gearing so much towards women, to like, in a way, it's like the perfect woman is the woman that goes to the bar with you, drinks the beers with the guys, does the keg stands, watches the game, has a fantasy football team. Women don't give a crap about that stuff. I know some do, but I'm just saying that it seems like, just on so many different levels, that women are being like forged into men, and like with porn and with OnlyFans, like you're saying, it's almost more of a patriarchal
it's
like
definitely
system.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's definitely part of the culture war that's going on right now. Okay. That the masculine man is actually a very, very the alpha male is very popular image in advertising and in pop culture, for sure. You know, I'm on my phone just like everybody else is every day. And half the ads, when I'm just wasting time playing, you know, some mindless game, half the ads are for these bearded alpha males. They're husky. They're selling knives. You know what I mean?
Let me interject though. I would argue though, in a way, the masculine men, like if you're to take, for example, like Marvel, how they treated all these superheroes like Thor, like Chris Pratt's character as Star-Lord, they're kind of like dumb jocks. Yeah. And I remember I was in therapy, and I'll just kind of share this. My therapist, when I was married and we were working through stuff, he asked us, like, you know, like what's kind of that image of like your partner that you have, you know, like what's that image? And I will never forget this. Like my ex, she was just kind of like Homer Simpson, kind of bumbling sitcom like guy that makes mistakes, that, you know, is kind of just makes dumb mistakes, and like, you know, and like wants to sit and like drink beer and like watch TV. But I feel like that's kind of like the modern day man. And I think that is portrayed in a lot of television, a lot of movies. I think there are alpha males, but often like the alpha males as well, like don't have any kind of like real emotions. Like you kind of like look at The Rock, and he's just like a rock.
Right.
Like has the emotions of a rock, looks like a rock, You know, if it looks like a rock, talks like a rock, it's probably a rock. That's the rock.
Yeah. No, I
Sorry.
agree with you. And there are exceptions. I would point out to you, for instance, that once they tried to cancel Tim Allen, and
Yeah.
his news show went over to a different network. My wife and I, it's one of my favorite shows because I've never seen a show besides maybe Married with Children that shows a more mature and healthy version of a marriage between a man and a woman than Tim Allen's show. And it's so mature because there's no denigration of men and there's no denigration of women. People get to be who they are. They are taken at their at where they are, and it's very, very funny and it's very, very smart.
But how mainstream is that though? Like that's not really that mainstream.
It's as mainstream as it can be in our fragmented culture,
right?
For sure.
Do you know what's mainstream? And I sorry to keep interrupting.
No, go ahead.
What's mainstream is TLC's I think it was like there's some show where people break out of prison and they date each other, or they don't break out of prison. It's like right when they get out of prison. It's like life behind or love without
after bars or
yeah,
whatever.
something like that. There's all these shows about the Real Housewives. There's all these shows that are like these reality shows showing just uber rich people that are just terrible to each other. I think there's a lot of sitcoms as well. I mean, even The Simpsons, right? Like Homer Simpson's is like the stupid guy. Family Guy, all this stuff. I feel like it's a denigration of men and like what true masculinity looks like.
Well, yeah, I would agree with that. Although I would say this, I've always said this about comedy. It's divided between people who write who don't like human beings and people who write who do like human beings.
Yeah, that's true.
And the writers of The Simpsons and South Park actually like human beings. And
you know what show's great? King of the Hill.
Yes. And
is fantastic.
At the end of the day, you never doubt that Homer Simpson, imperfect as he is, loves his wife and loves his family.
That's true.
And you never doubt that Marge loves Homer. And that's a really good thing. With Family Guy, I'm not so sure. You see what I mean?
Like Stewie's literally trying to kill his parents. Like
exactly. And so I get the humor and I can enjoy it for a short period of time. But at the end of the day, it's like the difference between The Lord of the Rings, which actually believes in the very foundation of human society and seeks to save it.
Right.
From the forces that are arrayed against it, which is really what we're talking about.
Yep.
And something like Star Trek, which I'm not a fan of because it's a utopian fantasy that is sprinkled with human frailty and it's not sure what side it wants to come down on. But I'm not also deeply, deeply inured in that mythology. So any Star Trek fans out there, don't get mad.
I love the original
Star Wars.
The original Star Trek. I played Captain Kirk for Halloween one year in college, and I had to do some method acting. Captain Kirk is awesome. I love that guy. But with that being said, yeah, I get your point though.
Yeah, that I was just making a point. But I think ultimately what we are talking about and what we have been talking about is the war of the powers and principalities and the way that they seek to manipulate our weaknesses to become either pawns in that war, which is, I think, ultimately what Lily Phillips has made herself into. And I feel bad for her. And I will pray for her. I'll pray for her mom. I hope that she comes to her senses because, like I said to my wife this afternoon when we were talking about my doing the podcast tonight, was like, if her next goal is to have sex with 1,000 people, I'm afraid she's going to die.
Yeah. Like how, like the amount of damage that can do to her body, but also just the amount of damage that can do to her mental health.
Oh, absolutely. So I pray that it doesn't happen.
Me too. And I hope everyone listening right now, that's part of the reason I wanted to talk about this as well is, although this is like such an important thing to see and to hear about, ultimately, and we both believe in Jesus Christ, Christian faith, there's redemption in everybody, right? And I believe that there's redemption for Lily Phillips. She has to find that redemption in herself, right? But I don't think that's going to happen if people are just throwing mud on her and yelling shame, right? Like, I think there's a place for that, right? And people should rightfully feel disgusted by it and have that level of I think just anger towards just like what's going on in culture. But I think we also got to think about the men that were involved, which I think were her fans that came
Oh,
in,
sure.
which is nuts. And just like where's the discussion about them and them getting involved in that, right? Because it's not all about her, it's also about those men involved. It's about the people that produce this, that put this online, the people that consume it. um and I think we got to continue to talk about it, but talk about it in a productive way and talk about it in a mature way to where we can really kind of understand deeply what's going on here so that we have the tools, we have the stamina, we have the maturity to be able to talk about this as adults and as Christians, to be able to still have love in our hearts for people. Because, like you said, Dr. Borse, we're all sinners, right?
Yeah.
We're all sinners. And I think this was in a sermon not too long ago in my church where really, the punishment for sin is death. But that's why Jesus died on the cross for us, is to
Yeah.
redeem that to pay that. He died. The death of Christ, paid the way for our sins. And we
Yeah.
need to accept him in our lives and live in his image. And I think a big thing to do, and this is one of my favorite stories in the Bible, was when the adulteress was about to be stoned, right? And he draws a line in the sand, and he says, "He who did not sin or has not sinned, cast the first stone." And then he turned around and told her, like, "Hey, like you need to change your ways."
And
But he
and
didn't.
what
He didn't stone her.
and I what I'd like to point out about that is that in the original Aramaic, the expression that he uses to the men that are there, he who is without sin, specifically implies the sin of having had sex with this woman.
Wow. Yeah.
It's specific.
Mm.
Those of you with stones in your hand who did not sin the way she did with her, you cast the first stone, and they all walk away.
Mm.
Which is absolutely to your point about pornography and the differences in the kind of damage that is inflicted. Because the mechanism of damage of porn to women is different than it is to men. And what you notice about porn and men is that men are just embodied placeholders.
Mm.
They are completely stripped of any sort of identity. And at the same time, women are highlighted at the center of the images that are promulgated.
Right.
And yet, given this false sort of agency in all of it, because they've got to be willing. I'm not talking about the darker aspects. We know those exist too. But
I mean, 91% of Pornhub has been shut down the last years because of lack of consent. To where, and just to highlight this really quick, really good book, like about 60% of the way through it, by Lila McElwaite. She has a X account. She's fantastic. It's called Takedown. Really good book. I think I have it back there. If it was next to me, I'd show it. But it's called Takedown. But she did a lot of work to get a lot of this stuff uncovered with Pornhub, to where basically you can just post videos on Pornhub without having to verify any kind of age,
right,
any kind of consent. Like she just kind of would do it on her own, like just film just some random thing on the ground and just hit, upload. And you could type just about anything. And then they would start editing the titles to kind of get around loopholes with teenagers with abuse.
right.
And what's been found is like 91% of their site basically was monetized rape, monetized trafficking, underage people. And it makes me freaking angry because that's stuff that on average 10-year-old kids are watching their first time, is somebody being raped someone being trafficked,
And at the
and
same time,
it's terrible. Yeah,
I
go
would
ahead.
bet that most mature consenting adults who avail themselves of pornography on the internet do so by telling themselves that all of this is between consenting adults. And
Yeah,
so it's very important. It's very important for somebody like Lila to expose the fact that no, it's not, and you can't tell. So stop it.
right.
And I'll end with this because I feel like Frank Kermode here that we're coming to an ending here. But I'll end with this. I had a young man come to me a few years ago with a moral conundrum. And I remember I said to him, I said, are you sure you want me to answer this question? And he said, of course, I respect your opinion. Of course, I want to hear your opinion. Why wouldn't I want to hear what you have to say? I said, because when you hear what I have to say, you may have to do something.
Right.
So, and that's something that you feel like you need to do, you might not initially like.
Right.
And he ended up letting me give my answer. But this is the answer I gave him without revealing any details about the situation. At the end of Catholic confession, we say a prayer, okay? After we have opened up our dirtiest secrets to another individual who is sitting in persona Christi. So, yeah, I am confessing it to another human being, which is very important psychologically, okay? When he offers me absolution, he doesn't offer it from his own point of view. He's doing it in the person of Christ, okay? And I understand why people have certain kinds of problems with this. That's fine. My point is this. At the very end, we do what's called an act of contrition, in which we say these words, that we promise to go forth and sin no more, and to avoid the near occasion of sin. And what I said to this young man was, don't forget this. Are you sure that you want to be the near occasion of sin for someone else? And he said, I didn't think of it like that. And I think that is lost in the whole lie of the fact that human relations are all transactional.
Which is, I think, at its very core, it's that's a Marxist belief, isn't it?
Yes. And what I said to him is, I said, look, as guilty as you might feel, having had relations with another person that you feel were selfish and were for your own reasons and not, I said, imagine what it's like to be that person for a minute, sitting alone in her room again, asking herself why this keeps happening. Why did these boys treat me this way? And then they leave. And he said, I never thought of it like that. I was like, get in the habit.
Yeah, that's a great point. That was a lot of hard. That was a hard truth I had to come to. When I was in my marriage and when it was going downhill, was I had to look in the mirror and understand all the pain I was causing my wife at the time.
Yeah.
All the pain, because I will tell you, and if you're listening and you've done this before, I mean, I've done this before, my initial reactions, when I was caught watching porn, caught lying about it, was justification, or I would accuse her of why are you so mad about this? Gaslighting to the 10th degree.
Not that big a deal.
Not that big of a deal. Why are you so mad? And then trying to put it on her, it's her problem. It's I'm the perpetrator. I'm the one that's literally wasting my seed to somebody else, where I'm committed. I committed in front of peers, in front of God, that I would be faithful to you. What does that mean exactly, to be faithful, right? Does it just mean, well, I'm faithful to you until I feel sad and I need to go look at porn to numb the pain? That's not justifiable, but it's something that you can work through. And like you said, to repent for it and to realize we can't fix ourselves. We can't fix our relationship with porn until we can realize what the relationship actually is and stop glossing over it. We have to dig deep and understand what hole am I trying to fill right now?
Yeah.
There's a great podcast called Porn Free Radio, and that's what really got me going. It's a fantastic podcast. If you guys are looking for podcasts or listening, but he has a podcast where he talks about porn as a solution. And I think for a lot of people, it's been a solution for them. And it was for me, like a solution to feeling like I didn't have any value, or that I needed to be validated, or just feeling like I needed to like just avoid pain. It was like my solution. And like what like a powerful thing to be presented in front of you is just any woman of your choosing doing anything for your pleasure, right? And that's what makes it so dangerous. It's what makes it so addictive. Is it's not going to put you in a body bag. It's not like you can overdose on porn like you can with alcohol or with hard drugs and end up in a body bag. It's not going to do that, but it is going to kill your soul. And that's what I experienced. That's why I want to talk about it. It kind of brought up to me too. There's this beautiful prayer that maybe this can kind of close us out a little bit. It's actually from, there's a lot of good stuff. There's a lot of interweavings with porn recovery and 12-step.
Yeah.
But there's a great prayer. If you don't mind, I can read it real quick.
Go ahead.
So this is the first step prayer when someone's going through the first steps. Dear Lord, I admit that I am powerless over my addiction. I admit that my life is unmanageable when I try to control it. Help me this day to understand the true meaning of powerlessness. Remove from me all denial of my addiction. And I think that's so important because there's so much denial that happens. There's so much denial that I think we build up in our brains as like a defense mechanism almost of like, how could I have like looked at all this stuff? Like if I was to go back and look through all the things, right? Like, of course, I would deny that I ever looked at that stuff because in its nature, like you said, it's an attack on the sacred and we're participating in it. But yeah, I don't know. Any last words for you? I think maybe ending on like a high note, like what words of encouragement would you send to people that are struggling with this or that, see this happening, this Lily Phillips situation, or just like, oh my gosh, there's no hope for this world. What message of encouragement do you have for the listeners today?
I would say this, and COVID, you mentioned COVID earlier, and I'll just use it as a touchstone, but my weakest times are when I am, have been most successful and have my own downtime and don't really have any pressing, responsibilities.
Right.
And I've recognized that about myself. It's just easy. Like I'm on Christmas vacation right now, right? I could have started drinking at 11 o'clock this morning. I got nothing to do tomorrow. You know what I mean? And I realized about myself that my best defense against my own weaknesses is to fill my calendar with the good. And I have to fill my calendar with responsibilities. I need to drive up to the parish hall and pick up these 7 coats that I dedicated myself to donating to 8th graders at Drew Middle. And I need to do that today because the counselor is expecting them. And after that, I got to text all the guys over here because I need this. And I needed to, just fill your calendar with the good and crowd out the times when you're alone and vulnerable, because that's when you're going to succumb to these temptations. So do that.
It's fantastic. Yeah. And just to add on that, so something I talk about a lot and something that's really key to recovery are 4 activities in recovery. So you have your spiritual activities, your spiritual health. You have your physical activities, your physical health. You have your relationships, like your connections, like you're talking about, like connecting with community. And then the last one that's super important is your passions. Like, what are you passionate about? Like, what are things that you can get lost in that are positive for you? And I think you hit the nail on the head, Dr. Borse. And, hopefully if you're watching, you're listening, this is like a light bulb moment for you. But really, when you fill your time with the good, right, where you fill your time with Christ, where you fill your time with connection, people you love, your passions, the things that you just love to do, porn actually becomes less and less powerful, becomes less and less appetizing, because you're like, why would I want to just like go in my basement, lock myself in a room, have to lie about it. That's something with porn too. It's like every time like you relapse again after a like long sobriety, you're just like, why am I doing this? Like now I have to like go through this process of repairing trust and talking about it. And it's just like, why go back to that? Like where life is good, like things are good, so that's fantastic. So Dr. Borse, just real quick for the audience, things that you'd like them to check out on your end, where they can find you.
Well, you can find me on X. That's really the only platform that I employ right now. I post under my own name at Gregory Borse on X. I'd love to see you guys there. I warn you, I'm a free speech absolutist. I'm pretty funny. I'm not apologetic, but sometimes I don't get it exactly right. And I also would just recommend that you guys over Christmas, avail yourselves of some great authors that can sort of reset things. Read some G.K. Chesterton, read C.S. Lewis, and I'm not talking about the Chronicles of Narnia, although I totally recommend them. But read C.S. Lewis's Apologetics, Mere Christianity, or The Abolition of Man, or G.K. Chesterton's Orthodoxy is fantastic in resetting in a very, very serious way what it means to be human, what it means to be made in the image and likeness of God, and what it means that God himself took that so seriously that he became man and died as the likeness and image for us. You talk about porn as a solution, and I'm gonna say at the end of the day, we're not searching for solutions which are cheap.
Right.
We're searching for absolution, and the thing about absolution is that it's a recognition of two things. My sin is my own. It was actually an expression of my individual agency, but I can't forgive myself for that. It's going to take somebody better than me to do it. And until you recognize that you can't do it, I hear people say this all the time. You got to be able to forgive yourself. Guys, that's a trap. You must be forgiven by somebody else. You must be forgiven by the person that you hurt. And of course you hurt yourself in the process, but the hurting of yourself was a sin against God. And so that's where that absolution comes from. Totally serious about that. So get with it. And happy Advent and Merry Christmas to all of you. Thank you so much for having me, man.
Yeah. And thank you again. Just you add so much value to the conversation. And for everyone listening, really appreciate you being on. Please share this message. Just share it. I think one of the biggest concepts that we've talked about today is bringing this out in the open, not hiding anymore. I think stepping up as people to talk about this and to understand this as something that's destructive, the porn industry. And for me, I have a podcast called Porn Free Millennial. You can find that on Apple, Spotify. I write a lot on Substack. I have a weekly newsletter I've been working on that's been really fun to do, that has tips, that has tools, articles. There's a community spotlight where I highlight things that people in the community talk about. And I'm growing that newsletter out, which has been great. And really, I'm just trying to help spread the message, talk about my experiences so that other people don't have to hit that same crisis that I did, and that you guys can have that light bulb moment. I'm going to add one more prayer in, if that's okay. This is one I was looking for, Dr. Borse. This is one that's shared to me by my mentor, host of the Finding Traction podcast, Vern Tomke. We do weekly recovery groups together, but he's also a pastor. And this is a beautiful prayer. Hopefully I don't tear up reading this because it's just beautiful. But you okay if I finish this off with this prayer and then we'll end it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Please.
So this is called A Liturgy for One Battling a Destructive Desire by Douglas McKelvey. Jesus, I am here again, desiring a thing that were I to indulge in, it would war against my own heart and the hearts of those I love. O Christ, rather let me live by thine. Take my desires, let them be subsumed in still greater desire for you, until there remains no room for these lesser cravings. In this moment, I might choose to indulge in a fleeting hunger, or I might choose to love you more. Faced with this temptation, I would rather choose you, Jesus, but I am weak. So be my strength. I am shadowed. Be my light. I am selfish. Unmake me now and refashion my desires according to the better designs of your love. Given the choice of shame or glory, let me choose glory. Given the choice of this moment or eternity, let me choose in this moment what is eternal. Given the choice of this easy pleasure or the harder road of the cross, give me the grace to choose to follow you, knowing that there is nowhere apart from your presence where I might find the peace I long for, no lasting satisfaction apart from your reclamation of my heart. Let me build, then, my King, a beautiful thing by long obedience, by the steady progression of small choices, that laid end to end will become like the stones of a pleasing path, stretching to eternity, and unto your welcoming arms, and unto the sound of your voice, pronouncing the judgment, well done. And we'll end it there.
Amen.
End it there. Amen. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Have a blessed night and keep fighting the good fight. Talk to y'all later.